again, this is Ken Kreitzer for CBSI Services, Talking Business, our interview series, talking with leaders in the field of digital banking, insurance, direct marketing, customer service, and business education, all to highlight our team here at CBSI. We're based in Harrison. I'm back in the home office today, first time in 15 months, and it's great to be here. We've got a lot of our team back in the office today, and we really appreciate the work they've done taking care of our clients in the banking industry and their customers. Now, today we have a chance to talk and catch up with a good friend of ours, and that is John Witkowski, who's the president and CEO of the Independent Bankers Association of New York State. John, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, we've had a chance to talk a little bit during COVID. We had a chance to meet on Do a Talk last year. And certainly the community bankers have really done a great job of working with their customers and communities, helping on the Paycheck Protection Program in particular, and quite a few other measures. Tell us a little bit about what the last 6-9 months has been like for your members of community bankers of New York State.
Well, I got to be honest with you, the whole PPP process was a huge hit for the community banks. They stepped up big time for all of the small businesses and all of the people in their communities. And I couldn't be more proud to be associated with all the community banks and what they've done around the state and really around the country. 70% of the loans were made by community banks across the country. And again, if you look at the amount of work and the amount of effort they put in to make sure their communities were taken care of, they did a fantastic job. So, that was the first step in the process. And, last year, the SBA program, the SBA partnership with PPP started off to be a little bit uneasy because not everybody knew exactly what was going on, including the SBA. They put this thing together very quickly, but I have to tell you, even from the SBA side, even though they kept coming out with different rules and regs along the way, the businesses got their money, the banks got their money, and it became a much smoother process over the course of the year. And to be honest with you, to hand out that amount of money for small business to keep them up and running was a great job. And the community banks, all community banks should be very proud of themselves.
Absolutely. Now, as the pandemic is lessening and many of us are back in our offices first time in 15 months, stadiums now are opening up to full capacity, and many events are now looking at being in person. What do you see the big needs of for your bankers and the communities they serve, different areas, travel, tourism, certainly, and other fields? What are the big needs that your bankers are trying to address?
Well, again, I mean, if you look at all the communities that our banks are in, obviously the entertainment, the hotel and hospitality industry, restaurants were hit the hardest out of all this. To see them come back, and many of them, unfortunately, have not made it through. I mean, it was just a very tough time, but we're hoping that with some of the programs we have out there and some of the great relationships that are met with each of these communities, those restaurants and hospitality and hotels will come back stronger now. And if you notice, a lot of people are out and about. The roads are more busy, the towns are more busy, people are walking around, you have restaurants sitting outside. I'm in the Western New York area, and I've traveled across the state over the last week to 10 days. And every town I've been into used to be a ghost town for the last 15 months. Now you see people out, and it's becoming a lot more, I'll use the word normal, if you will. But there's a lot of changes that are going to take place post-pandemic. Branch hours for the bank side, those are things that might change. We had a lot of technology, a lot of innovation during the time of the last 15 months that banks got very comfortable with, a lot of online account opening, online lending. So there's changes in the industry, but the most important part of it is these community banks supporting and helping out the small businesses and the restaurants and hotels and hospitality businesses in their communities.
And John, you hinted at some of the lasting change within the banking industry, technology practices that have proven to work, to be appreciated by customers. Obviously, during the pandemic, call volumes for contact centers across the industry went up as much as 40%, and it wasn't possible always to keep a branch open. What were some of the practices and techniques that your banks learned that you feel like they're going to stay with going forward?
Well, it's interesting because, even during the pandemic, many branches were open, but you just had to make an appointment for some of the more complex, transactions. So I got to give those people a lot of credit for going into the office every day. The banks were taking care of their employees. It's really something that was special. The difference, I think, between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, I think the last time we talked, Ken, online was we were talking about innovation. We were talking about technology. We were talking about what the next steps were in the process prior to the pandemic hitting. I think what the pandemic did is just speed that process up and make sure that all these banks understand, maybe not how the ease of it is, but what the transition needs to be going forward. Because a lot of customers, even older customers, were not used to the online, have gotten used to the online because they didn't want to be out in public, didn't want to be at risk for their health in going out of their own home. So they got used to doing things online. From the innovation side, I think a lot of banks feel very comfortable now in using different companies to help them digitize their transactions and digitize their whole website.
Absolutely. One on the technology side, and this is something you introduced us to Bob Fisher from the CEO of Tioga State Bank, who is now the national chairman of the Independent Community Bankers of America. He talked about the need to implement fintech, looking at fintech as a partner rather than a competitor. So much happening in that field, but tell us a little bit about how fintech is being utilized by smaller banks to be able to serve customers the way a larger bank might be able to.
Well, you talk about information, and a lot of the fintechs these days gather information from the banks, or just they gather information and they're gatherers, and they slice and dice that information and they try to figure out what is the next step in the process for these customers? What is their trend? What are they doing? And the banks, to be honest with you, from the community bank side, a lot of them felt very comfortable. They knew what their customers were all about. Well, I think what the pandemic has done is made those fintech partnerships, the artificial intelligence, the data gathering, the trending, the analytics around all that information really can help community banks. The bigger banks were doing it before, and as we know, over time it keeps coming down, and the community banks will get more involved. Again, I think partnering with fintechs and partnering with fintechs that are, how do I say this? That are focused on community banks is important, and they're not in it for the short term. They're in it for the long haul. They're in it for making sure that community banks can use that information, find their next level of sale for their customers, find out the trends that their customers are making, and also be able to go out and find customers that would like to work with these community banks. It's an interesting time, and I think the information gathering part of it was something that the community banks were just getting into prior to the pandemic, but they know how important it is now.
And certainly the area of data security has just become more of a priority with some of the cyber attacks. We actually did a talk with Nicole Perlroth of the New York Times, a cyber writer for the paper, who pointed out that she felt banks were ahead of other industries because data security has always been a priority. But it seems like it's at another level now. How do you see your banks and the community banks working to keep data secure?
Well, we're a very regulated industry, as you know, and from either the state or the federal side, federal regulators, they do have their thumb very close to that cyber and making sure that the banks are secure. And they also add an extra level of security. But that doesn't preclude, the banks from having an issue with a cyber attack, because as you know, cyber criminals have different ways of getting into different systems, and they use customers, and they use wherever the weakest link is, they try to get in. But the banks are used to having another level of security because it's regulated by the industry, and DFS of New York State has regulated another level of security for the banks. And I think it's really important. Obviously, that's where the money sits. The money sits in these banks, and if people are going to try to get the ransomware or try to break into different systems, the banks got to be the first ones to protect not only the banks but their customers, the money, and all of the integrity that goes along with being a bank.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned Robert Fisher, CEO of Tioga State Bank in the Ithaca area, serving as the national chairperson of the Independent Community Bankers Association. Must be proud to have one of your New York State members leading the national organization. We saw Bob Fisher host a Capitol Hill Day program. You had Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia in that program, also Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And I know you've been working legislatively in New York State, going to Albany. What are some of the key topics that you're talking to members of Congress and members of the New York State Legislature about now?
The first thing I want to say is that Bob Fisher is the third New York State community banker to hold the position of ICBA chairman. The first one was Sal Maranka from Cattaraugus County Bank. John Burmaster from First National Bank of Scotia did it back in 2017, and Bob has it this year. So we have a long history of having leaders in the ICBA, and we're very proud of that. Bob he's a fifth generation community banker, and you can't ask for a more passionate, more focused person on community banking than Bob at Tioga State Bank, NA. So we're real proud of that. His passion for this has spilled over into many of our banks in New York State, along with John Burmaster and Sal Maranka's. But it really is something special to have a person from New York run that, be on top of that organization. And he is on the Hill all the time talking about the different issues that community banks face today. One of the things on the state level that we're dealing with is the proposal of a state bank, which for the community banks and for the state, I think would be a big issue. We're taking a look at how the state can hold funds and provide funds for a state bank to lend out money. And it's a regulated industry. We're a heavily regulated industry, and the last thing you want the state to be is heavily regulated in this industry, and it's not going to be a very effective or successful way of doing banking in New York State. So that's one of the issues at the state level.
What kind of format would that be? Is that like a new charter type, or is that a new format?
Well, they would take a lot of the state deposits and fund, a lot of their deals through the state. And, again, there's different ways that we can help the underserved and unbanked and minority, areas of the state. And a lot of our community banks are doing it. I mean, we have some great programs down in New York City and here in upstate New York that help all the underserved, unbanked, and minority owned businesses. And there's just a lot of programs that we're working with and being very effective with to help these different groups. And I'm very proud of the fact that the community banks are very focused on doing that and very involved in getting this done, being very progressive with it. And in our minority, and downtown, downstate in New York City, Manhattan, the 5 boroughs, there's a lot of programs that our community banks are holding and getting involved in. So from the standpoint of bringing a state bank on, it really, in my opinion, and a lot of the community banks' opinions, and all community banks' opinion, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that, because what you're doing is taking the tax money that people are paying the state, putting it into a not-for-profit state bank, and using that money that you're not going to get any revenue out of it. Look, banks are in it. They pay their taxes. They do a great job, and they really are taking care of their communities, both upstate and downstate.
So the idea of a state bank would be to help underserved, underbanked communities and individuals and minority businesses
Ken, and just so you know, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it is an important part of the process. But if you look at the community banks and the programs and the CDFIs and the other groups, even Pursuit, which is the formerly New York Business Development Corp, all those groups and all those people are very focused on taking care of those communities.
Absolutely. Now, John Witkowski, President and CEO of the Independent Bankers Association of New York State. Seems like all the organizations I'm involved with are discussing having in-person events, perhaps conferences in the fall. What are you planning for meetings, webinars for your organization for looking for the balance of the summer going into the fall?
We've just announced that we're going to have our first in-person meeting in over a year in September, and we're going to go to Clayton, New York, and have a 2-day meeting, a one overnight 2-day meeting with our community banks, our executives, and then next year we already have our convention set up for June of next year. So we're getting back into the swing of things of getting people together. I did poll our banks and our board of directors to make sure they were comfortable in getting back together. But from that perspective, everybody was, excited about doing it. And so, we're going to take advantage of it. We're going to go out and we're going to be able to get everybody back in person and do 1 day of education, 1 day of maybe golf and fishing and keynote speaker, and some network time because people haven't seen each other in 15 months. So we're going to get back together and start doing some in-person meetings. As far as other meetings that we've done, we've used Zoom quite a bit, and actually it's been very effective for us because what we're able to do is through our Zoom calls have 2 days of education, speakers, presentations, but we've been able to invite the whole bank. And we've been able to invite all the different groups that might be impacted by whatever the presentation is. So if you have a cyber, if you have loan review, if you have audit, if you have, these different presentations on different topics, those groups can come see those topics during the Zoom event. So we've been very pleased with our success in having Zoom events too. So I think we're going to continue that for all of the banks and then also be able to do some in-person events next year.
Absolutely. I mean, all the trade groups we work with and marketing and customer service, all are talking about kind of a hybrid going forward of in-person events. Everybody wants to see each other. I was at my first in-person meeting in New York on Friday, and but it's so convenient to do a webinar for an hour and not have to travel 2 hours.
It is
for that event, and also to reach more people. Using Zoom effectively can really enlarge the audience. And the opportunity to, for training and getting the message out. John Witkowski, do you have a final thought for us today? Certainly everybody's got to be excited that it looks like we're going to have a very active summer and things should be hopefully largely back to normal by the fall.
No, again, I think it's nice to transition out of what we were in and to get back outside and get a chance to see people. But again, when you go through these communities and you see what's going on, I'm really looking forward to the 4th of July and having people get out and see some fireworks and get together. But again, it's going to be a slow comeback to all the businesses, and we hope that all the people out there understand that their community banks are there to help and serve their communities, and they will do everything they can to make sure you're successful.
Well, John Witkowski, the President and CEO of the Independent Bankers Association of New York State, great to visit with you and hear about really the work of community bankers this past year in helping their communities, the Paycheck Protection Program, other programs, and the learning that's going to be utilized going forward to better serve customers. Great to talk with you. I hope we do it again very soon.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it, and I look forward to our next discussion.
Absolutely. Good to see you. Thank you. And this is Ken Kreitzer for CBSI Services. We're based in Harrison, New York, and I'm back in my home office today, first time in about 15 months to do a video. And we provide insurance-based benefits and customer service management to the credit card and payments industry. And again, thank you to John Witkowski. And this is Ken Kreitzer again in my home office, back in my regular office here in Harrison, New York. Have a great day, everybody.